Our lesson with one another. I'll be encouraging you to open your Old Testaments tonight to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Sometime, I believe it was in 2022, we started preaching through the book of Deuteronomy and would try to hit about a chapter a month or so, looking to work through this Old Testament book and seeing the things we will learn about God and seeing things we especially learn about grace and how we have a relationship with God and what God expects of us as we respond to His grace. Obviously, this not being the covenant that you and I are under, but something that we want to be aware of as part of God's inspired word, that we can definitely learn from God's inspired word. It's, if I can maybe put it the way some people put it today, it's been a hot minute since we've talked about Deuteronomy in a lesson. And so, rather than just jumping into Deuteronomy chapter 19, which would be where we're picking up in that particular series of lesson, I want to spend some time going back to Deuteronomy, and like Barrett mentioned in his prayer, just spending some time reading Scripture tonight. And I think reading Deuteronomy chapter 6 through Deuteronomy chapter 11, not that whole text, but a good part of that text will be helpful for us to reframe our minds of what is Deuteronomy about? What are some of the key themes and ideas? What should we be looking for as we open up the law of Moses and seeing the things that God expected of His people in this covenant relationship, and hopefully see the very obvious parallels to our type of relationship that we have with God under the covenant that we have that's been established by Jesus Christ. So as we're in Deuteronomy chapter 6 tonight, just a couple of things that remind us of the purpose and the big idea of the book. The purpose of the book seems to be explaining the law to the next generation from the wilderness that's getting ready to enter the land of Canaan. You may remember in your biblical history, you have the book of Exodus, where God's people are in Egypt and they're enslaved, and then they're left out of Egypt, they're led out of Egypt, I should say. They get to Mount Sinai, and they're there from the end of end of Exodus all the way through the whole book of Leviticus until Numbers chapter 10, where they leave Mount Sinai and they go out into the wilderness on their way to the promised land. But along the way, some spies go into the land and they look at all the people, look at all the good parts of the land, and the spies come back and say, it's a wonderful place, it's going to be amazing, but the people are too big. And if some of the spies in particular seem to really affect the rest of the people to say, we can't do this, we can't go take this land. And ultimately what they're saying from that is that God is not faithful to deliver us and help us in that moment. So God says that generation of people, particularly the soldiers who were numbered earlier in the book, who would have gone in and conquered the land, who said that we're going to go to this land and our wives and children can be devoured. The soldiers are not going to go in, but their children will go in. So it's that generation, that next generation that Moses is speaking to, that he's preaching to, that he's encouraging and teaching about. This is what the law is. I want you to understand and know that, so when you go into the land, you can worship God and you'll find success in having that relationship with Him. A big idea of this book would be this thought of, as recipients of God's grace, how do we effectively live in a covenant relationship with God? As recipients of God's grace, how do we effectively live in a covenant relationship with God? And even just in the small part of Deuteronomy we're going to be looking at together this evening, you'll notice how we're supposed to live in a covenant relationship with God. There's two big things that kind of boil down to how people live in a covenant relationship with God. When God shows people grace, like giving them a land that doesn't belong to them, like when He offers His Son as a sacrifice for their sins that they deserve to face the wrath of, how God expects people to respond to that grace comes in these two forms. They love Him and they listen to Him. They love Him and the fact that they recognize that He is worthy of trust and faith in the relationship and the desire of that relationship and a priority above all else in relationships of our love to Him. But secondly, they listen. And when they listen to Him, it's not just, okay, got it, check, and I moved on. The idea they listen and it comes into their hearts and it's shown in the lives, in the way that they act out in their lives, the way that they obey God and what He has called them to do through the law. Those two ideas relate to how people respond to God's grace. We listen and we love God. And we can see that here in the book of Deuteronomy. And reminding ourselves of the setting that as Moses is acting as a shepherd here. I think we've talked about this before, that Deuteronomy, sometimes if we were to define Deuteronomy, you might know that sometimes as we define it, we would say it's the second giving of the law. Okay, second giving of a law, and especially where we're going to pick up in our sermon series starting next Sunday evening in Deuteronomy 19, gets to some of those. Okay, here's a law about cities, and the law's about priests, and there's a law here, and there's a law there. And Moses is just reading laws. And it can be, as we read the book of Deuteronomy, sometimes we think of it of just that. Moses is like some type of legal person who's just reading legal jargon that is always just way up here above my head whenever I have to do some of those legal papers. Anytime I'm trying to double check to make sure I'm doing my taxes right, they say, go to this particular page. It's a whole bunch of language, and just tell me how much money I owe you, right? Why do you have to put in all this complicated language? That's what sometimes I think about when we look at laws in this regard. Moses is not just reading laws here. He's preaching and teaching out of his love and care for these people, acting as a shepherd to them, acting as a pastor of sorts to them. And as he cares about them, he does at times go over these sections of law as it teaches them about God and how they have a relationship with God. But it emphasizes those ideas of, as they're recipients of God's grace, how they live as recipients of that is that they love God and that they listen to him. Let's be reminded about that tonight. Spend some time in the book of Deuteronomy in these chapters, in Deuteronomy chapter 6. We'll read Deuteronomy chapter 6 through chapter 9 and verse 6. Then we'll pick up in chapter 10, verse 12 through the rest of chapter 11. So there's this particular sermon here that actually kind of starts in chapter 4. But I want to move ahead a little bit to chapter 6. We'll read through these chapters. It should take us less than 20 minutes to do so. And then we're going to jump to the end of Deuteronomy for an invitation this evening from Deuteronomy 31. But let's listen to this idea. These are people who are receiving God's grace. How does God want his people to respond to them? How are we seeing the same ideas for us? You know, the idea is not going to be the end of tonight that we're going to go stand on the edge of the land of Canaan and we're going to go in and conquer that land. There's a lot going on over there right now. We probably don't want to be there in that moment. But as we hear what it's like to be in a relationship with God, what can we learn about our own purpose and our own response and our own relationship with him? So let's listen to God's word this evening. Let's be in Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, and that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant, and when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. For the Lord your God is in your midst, and is a jealous God, lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from the face of the earth. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies, and his statutes, which he has commanded you. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you, and that you may live and go into the land and take possession of the good land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. Verse 19, by thrusting out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has promised. When your son asks you time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules that the Lord our God has commanded you? You shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. As the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, the Lord showed signs and wonders, great and grievous, against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all the household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there that he might bring us in and give us the land that he swore to give our fathers. The Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are this day. And it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to do all this commandment before the Lord our God as he has commanded us. I don't plan to make many pauses for explanations, but hopefully we've caught on a couple of things already, right? In this one chapter, we've seen the idea that God has done so much good things for his people, that he's going to bless them with these things that they did not do. Did you hear that last? The vineyards, the farmland, the cities, all that. These are things that they did not build, did not plant. God is giving to them as gifts as they go into this land because of his promise with their forefathers. What they need to do is they need to love God, they need to fear God, they need to obey God, they need to teach people how to love God and fear God and to obey God. And to remember, as they continue to grow in that relationship, the danger that as you continue to enjoy the blessings that God gives you, to think, and I'm pretty good about all this stuff. I've done lots of great things. I'm doing all right. And to look at ourselves, continue to look for these themes going forward, and that we would not have those same type of problems that Moses warns the Israelites about. That as we think about the blessings God has shown us, we would never think, wow, I've really done all this good stuff. I've put myself where I am today, and I am where I am because of who I am. Rather, understanding is who God has made us to be, has molded us to be, and shaped us to be, of why we have many of these blessings. But continue to see these themes, though. Chapter 7 of Deuteronomy. Chapter 7 and verse 1. When the Lord our God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. Make no covenant with them, and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, taking their daughters for your sons, where it would turn away your sons from following me, to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall break down the altars, and dash in their pieces the pillars, and chop down the Asherim, and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It is not because you are more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you are the fewest of all the people. It is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers. The Lord has brought you with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keeps his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repays to the face of those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates him. He will repay him to his face. You shall therefore be careful to do the commandment and the statutes and the rules that I command you today. And because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, the Lord your God will keep with you the covenant and the steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, your grain, your wine, and your oil, and increase in your herds, and the flock of your flock, and the young of your flock, and in the land he swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all peoples, and there shall not be a male or female barren among you or your livestock. And the Lord will take away from you all sicknesses, none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you knew when he afflict on you, but he will lay them on all who hate you. And you shall consume all the people that the Lord your God will give over to you. Your eyes shall not pity them, neither shall you serve their gods, for it would be a snare to you. But if you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? You shall not be afraid of them, but shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and wonders, the mighty hands, the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. So will the Lord your God do to all the peoples whom you are afraid. Moreover, the Lord your God will send hornets among them, until those who are left hide themselves from you and are destroyed. You shall not be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is in your midst, and great and awesome God. The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. You may not make an end to them at once, lest the wild beasts grow too numerous for you. But the Lord your God will give them over to you, and throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. He will give their kings into your hand, and you shall make their name perish from under heaven. No one shall be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. The carved images of their gods you shall burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, or shall take it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God. And you shall not bring an abominable thing to your house, and become devoted to destruction like it. You shall utterly detest and abhor it, for it is devoted to destruction. The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land that the Lord your God swore to give to your fathers. You shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you, these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. That sounds familiar from a song we sang a little while ago. Anyway, let's get back into Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 4. Your clothing did not wear out on you, or your foot did not swell these 40 years. Verse 5 of Deuteronomy chapter 8, know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, fountains of springs flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given to you. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 11. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built good houses and live in them, when your herds and your flock multiply, your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the gate and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there is no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you, and to do you good in the end. Beware, lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today to go in and dispossess nations greater and mightier than you, cities great and fortified up to heavens, a people great and tall, the sons of the Anakim, whom you know and what you have heard, who can stand before the sons of Anak. Know therefore today that he who goes over before you as a consuming fire is the Lord your God. He will destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall drive them out and make them perish quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Verse 4 of Deuteronomy chapter 9. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land, where it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going to possess the land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you, that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 6. Know therefore, the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. There's been admonition and encouragement again and again. This is one of those moments we'll pause to talk about what we've been reading. For this people to love him and to listen to him, to obey him, to be mindful of the great blessings that God is showing them, the surety they should have that as they go into this land, as they may have fear in their hearts, that they know who leads them in the battle, and they should be strong and courageous, as we see at the very end of the book, in the beginning of the next book in Joshua. That theme carries through underlining tones here in Deuteronomy as well. But you also see that repeated message too, don't go after other gods. That there's other things that are going to try to flash and grab your attention. It might be other gods. It might be internal things of my own heart trying to get too loud for what it should be. And we need to pay attention to those things. And I love chapter 9 when it comes in here. He talks about many of the blessings that they'll face and they'll experience and all the wonderful things they receive from God as these blessings. And Moses just reminds the people of how they got to where they are. Did they do it? No. Is it because of their righteousness that God's giving this land because they're holier and better than thou of the Canaanites who were already there? No. They're wicked, sinful people. That's why he's driving them out. If anything, the Israelites are stubborn probably just as much or maybe even more so than those people. And Moses is trying to keep the Israelites from being like that so that they won't be driven out later. A little bit of foreshadowing in our biblical history and knowledge. We know that that time comes when the people of Israel are like the Canaanites, are like these people who are driven out, and God keeps his word and is sure. And he does drive them out of that land. He takes them into Babylonian captivity. But he's reminding them, you're stubborn. Think about all the things you've experienced. He goes in through the next chapter, in chapter 9 and into chapter 10, he talks about experiences of their own rebellion. There's this situation with a golden calf somewhere in the book of Exodus. Says, y'all remember that? You remember how that went down? When we just entered that covenant relationship with God, and everything was wonderful and great, and you're already worshiping carved images, which was like one of the first things he told you not to do. You're grumbling and complaining constantly along the way in the wilderness. This idea that God's not going to take care of us. God doesn't worry about us. God doesn't want us at all, or us, or our families, or our kids. God has done all of this, bringing you out of Egypt, all the acts, all the might, all the power, all the care and love for them. How could you doubt God in that regard? Moses is trying to remind the people who are at this generation to say, see the lack of faith your forefathers had and their lack of knowledge and obedience in God, their rebellion against God, and don't have that same type of attitude. Let's jump forward, though, to chapter 10 and verse 12. We'll finish chapter 10, verse 12 through the rest of chapter 11. Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? To fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and the statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, the Lord your God to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heavens of heavens, the earth and all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart and love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. The stuff we've just skipped over a little bit, if I can just for one more moment interject. The stuff we just skipped over of how stubborn and rock-headed and stiff-necked. I've got somewhere in the notes of stubborn, this idea of being stiff-necked. You can think of a mule that you're trying to get along the way as you're doing farm work. And as you would try to twist that mule's neck to go, that mule is just keeping in place and you're not able to do the work you want to do. As those people have been like that, God still loves those people and loves their descendants and has plans and promises for them that he wants them to fulfill. They need to respond in that love and that obedience to him as well. They can't just do whatever they want out of that and just say, hey, thanks, buddy, for all the good things. But they need to respond in love and see the heart except for them. Out of all the things that God has made in the whole universe, verse 15 again of Deuteronomy chapter 10, yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart, and no longer be stubborn. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of hosts, the great, the mighty, the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God, and you shall serve him, and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God, who has done for you all these great and terrifying things that your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord has made you as numerous as the stars of heaven. You shall therefore love the Lord your God and keep his charges, his statutes, his rules, and his commandments always. Consider today, since I am not speaking to your children who have not known or seen it, consider the discipline, the Lord your God, his greatness, his hand, and his outstretched arm, his signs, his deeds that he did in Egypt to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to all in the land, and what he did to the army of Egypt, to their horses and the chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea flow over them, and as they pursued after you. How the Lord has destroyed them to this day, what he did to you in the wilderness until you came to this place, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and sons of Reuben, how the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up with the whole household, their tents and every living thing that followed them in the midst of all Israel. For your eyes have seen all the great work the Lord has done, and all that he did. You shall therefore keep the whole commandment that I command you today, that you may be strong and go in the land and take possession of the land that you are going over to possess, that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, and to their offspring a land flowing with milk and honey. The land that you are entering to take possession of is not like the land of Egypt, which you have come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated it like a garden of vegetables. But the land you are going over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water by the rain from heaven, a land that the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And if you indeed obey my commandments that I am commanding you today, to love the Lord your God, to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain of the land in its season, the early rain, the latter rain, that you may gather your grain and your wine and your oil. He will give grass in your fields and your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside to serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit, and will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign in your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you are sitting in the house and when you are walking by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. For if you will be careful to do all this commandment that I command you to do, loving the Lord your God, walking in all his ways, holding fast to him, the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations greater and mightier than you. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall be from the wilderness of Lebanon to the river Euphrates, and to the western sea. No one shall be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will lay the fear of you on the dread of you on all the land that you shall tread, as he promised. See, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. Deuteronomy 11:27. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today. The curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way that I am commanding you today, to go after other gods that you have not known. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, you shall set the blessings of Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. And there are they not beyond the Jordan, west of the road, toward the going down of the sun, in the land of the Canaanites, who live in the Arabah, opposite Gilgal, besides the oak of Moreh. For you are to cross over the Jordan, to go in, to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And when you possess it and live in it, you shall be careful to do all the statutes and the rules that I'm setting before you today. God has shown great grace to his people. God promises that he will show even much more grace to his people. And when God makes a promise, we know that he is faithful to keep that promise. And so what do people need to do in response to that? They need to love him and they need to listen to him. And if they don't, if they choose to go other directions, if they choose to disregard him, they get proud in their hearts, they choose idols, they worship other gods instead, there are very physical consequences that come with this particular covenant of either loving God or not loving God, the things that come from that. But the idea is there, and the idea is sure for us today as well, The covenant that God has shown us through his Son, the covenant that we can have eternal life with him, that we can have salvation, that we can have forgiveness of our sins. All the blessings that they get in here of the land and of the multiplication of children and gold and possessions, all that's wonderful, but this covenant still doesn't even talk about forgiveness of sins. The covenant that you and I have under Jesus, the covenant of forgiveness of sins and eternal life with God, it's an amazing thing. But as God has shown us that grace and has given us that gift and the opportunity of that gift, there are two things we need to do to at least boil it down to this way. We need to love him and we need to listen to him. And so just as Moses teases there with Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse 26, setting before you a blessing and a curse, let's go to the end of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 31. Deuteronomy chapter 31. Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 27. Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 27. This is towards the end of the book, when Moses' final words to the people before he dies and before he goes on and before Joshua ends up taking command and leading the people into the promised land, directing them to follow God and to serve him with all their heart, soul, and mind, and to love him and to listen to him. Deuteronomy 31, verse 27. Moses says, "For I know how rebellious and stubborn you are. Behold, even today while I am yet alive with you, you have been rebellious against the Lord. How much more after my death? Assemble to me all the elders of the tribes and elect your officers, that I may speak with the words of their ears and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For I know that after my death you will surely act corruptly and turn aside from the way that I have commanded you. All these days to come evil will befall you, because you will do what is evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger through the work of your hands." Go to the chapter before, in chapter 30. Start with me here, chapter 30 and verse 17. "But if you turn your hearts away, you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them. Declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land you are going over to the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth as a witness against you today. I set before you life and death, blessing and a curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God and obeying his voice and holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them." The New Testament, really even the Old Testament, talks about the day of the Lord that is coming. And as we look at that in the New Testament, the day of the Lord that is coming of this final judgment. That is going to be a great day. And that is a great day all around. It's going to be a great day just because of the sheer topic of which is coming, of when Jesus comes back to this earth and redeems all things, particularly those who put their faith in him and have trusted in him. A great day is coming for those who have trusted and loved the Lord when they will go be with him for all of eternity. It is also a great day and a very terrifying day for people who have chosen death. They've chosen death because they choose to rebel against God and have chosen not to submit to him. They have chosen not to love him and not to listen to him. And for them, they will be very terrified to hear him say, "I do not know you, depart from me." And they will spend eternity separated away from the Lord. Our encouragement to you tonight is to consider where you stand before God. And if we can help you in some way to choose life, to make sure that you are understanding what the New Testament teaches, what the Bible teaches about how we follow God, how we love him, how we listen to him, and how that was speaking in tongues there for a second. How we love him, how we listen to him, and the way that he says, right? Not the way that I get to say, not the way that we get to vote as majority to say, but the way that he says how we love and how we listen to him, that we can look forward to that great day that is coming. We want to make sure that you have that hope and have that confidence in your lives as you will stand before the Lord, because you have confidence in who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us. If we can help you with that, to prepare for that great day that is coming, please come meet me at the front while we stand and while we sing.